During the pilot rescue operation, why did the US military destroy two seemingly ordinary transport aircraft? They are just cargo planes, right? Well, no. The aircraft destroyed were not standard cargo haulers. They were two of the most heavily modified, technologically advanced, and highly classified workhorses in the US Air Force. They were MC-130J Commando II. Now, if you look at a standard C-130J Super Hercules and an MC-130J side by side on a tarmac, to the untrained eye, they look almost identical. They both have four Rolls-Royce turboprop engines. They both have the iconic high-wing design, and they both have a massive rear cargo ramp. But the standard C-130J costs around $70 million per airframe. The MC-130J costs roughly $110 million. That is a staggering $40 million difference for an aircraft that, dimensionally, is exactly the same. So, where does all that extra money go? Why is the Commando II so expensive? If you look closely at the aircraft, specifically from the cockpit forward to the nose, you will find the answer. The vast majority of that $40 million premium is crammed into the avionics, the sensors, and the electronic warfare suites. The MC-130J is not a cargo plane. It is a highly specialized infiltration platform that just happens to have a cargo bay. Let's talk about doctrine. The foundational C-130 Hercules is operated primarily by the Air Mobility Command. Its core design philosophy revolves around being a rugged, reliable tactical airlifter. Its job is to move troops, haul cargo, and transport equipment from point A to point B, often utilizing semi-prepared or dirt runways near the front lines. It is essentially the ultimate flying pickup truck of the US military. But the MC-130J is entirely different. It is custom-built by Lockheed Martin specifically for the Air Force Special Operations Command. From the moment its keel is laid on the factory floor, the Commando II is designed for one primary purpose: to operate directly under the enemy's nose. Its mission profile dictates clandestine, single-ship or multi-ship, low-level infiltration, exfiltration, and resupply of special operations forces. It is built to fly into politically sensitive, denied, or highly hostile territory, completely undetected, to drop off Navy SEALs, Army Delta Force operators, or Air Force pararescuemen. Every single modification made to this airframe is engineered to meet the extreme, unforgiving demands of the special operations community. The downed weapons systems officer was hiding in the Zagros Mountains, deep inside Isfahan province. To reach him and establish the forward refueling point, the two MC-130J had to penetrate one of the most heavily defended airspaces in the Middle East. They didn't do this by flying at 30,000 feet. They did it by flying nap of the earth. During the insertion, these massive aircraft were scraping the jagged ridges of the Zagros Mountains at altitudes of less than 100 meters above the ground. If you try to fly a standard C-130 at 300 feet through a mountainous valley in the pitch black of night, you are going to fly straight into a rock face. A standard Hercules is equipped with a conventional weather radar in its nose radome, which is great for avoiding thunderstorms, but completely useless for navigating through a mountain pass at 250 knots. To survive this, the MC-130J's nose houses a highly specialized terrain following and terrain avoidance radar. This radar constantly scans the topography directly in front of the aircraft, mapping the jagged peaks, valleys, and man-made obstacles. It feeds this data directly into the flight computers and the pilot's head-up displays. This multi-million-dollar upgrade allows the MC-130J to perform extreme, terrain-hugging flight profiles in zero-visibility conditions. By flying below the radar horizon and hiding within the radar clutter of the mountain valleys, the aircraft physically masks itself from Iranian long-range surface-to-air missile batteries. The Earth itself becomes their armor. But radar emits energy, and emitting energy in a contested environment is dangerous. Enemy electronic intelligence sensors can detect active radar emissions. So, what happens when the pilots need to fly entirely passive, emitting absolutely zero signals? If you look just beneath the nose radome of the MC-130J, you will see a small, spherical pod dropping down from the chin. This is a multispectral, electro-optical, infrared sensor turret. This turret acts as the unblinking eyes of the aircraft. It contains high-definition thermal imaging cameras and low-light sensors. Whether it is pitch black or they are flying through a blinding Middle Eastern dust storm, the pilots can look through this turret and see the terrain ahead of them as clearly as if it were a sunny afternoon. This system is absolutely critical for the exact type of mission we saw in Isfahan. When the MC-130J arrived at the abandoned agricultural dirt strip 380 kilometers from the Iraqi border, there were no runway lights. There was no air traffic control. Using the chin-mounted infrared turret, the crew was able to visually inspect the improvised runway, identify the safest landing zone, and touch down in total darkness without ever turning on a landing light. But hiding in the valleys only works until someone actually spots you. If an enemy patrol on a ridgeline hears the turboprops and fires a shoulder-launched, heat-seeking missile, the exact same weapon that brought down the F-15E Strike Eagle just days prior, a standard transport plane is in massive trouble. A standard C-130 in a hostile air defense zone is essentially a naked target. If it gets shot at, it can dump chaff and hot magnesium flares to decoy the missile, cross its fingers, and hope for the best. The MC-130J Commando II, however, is wrapped in an invisible suit of electronic armor. Scattered all across the fuselage are advanced missile warning sensors. The moment the ultraviolet plume of a missile launch is detected on the ground, the aircraft's computer instantly categorizes the threat. But instead of just dropping flares, the MC-130J utilizes a directional infrared countermeasure system, known as DIRCM. DIRCM is literally a turreted laser beam. In fractions of a second, the system swivels, tracks the incoming heat-seeking missile, and fires a concentrated beam of laser energy directly into the missile's seeker head, physically blinding it and forcing it off course. Beyond the laser defenses, the aircraft carries a heavily classified, full-spectrum radio frequency countermeasures suite. During the infiltration into Isfahan, these MC-130J did not fly alone. They were supported by Navy EA-18G Growler. Together, they forced open a localized digital umbrella over the sector. They pumped out massive amounts of electronic noise, blinding Iranian early warning radars and severing the communication links of local air defense batteries. The MC-130J's onboard electronic warfare officers monitored the threat environment in real time, dynamically adjusting their jamming profiles to counter any radar that managed to peek through the noise. It was this staggering array of defensive technology that allowed these massive four-engine aircraft to slip through the Iranian dragnet, land at the target site, and unload their special operations teams. Once the planes were on the ground, they had to execute their primary mission, establish the FARP. The MC-130J is not just a troop transport. It is a highly specialized aerial and ground refueling platform. Tucked under the outer wings of the Commando II are dedicated hose and drogue aerial refueling pods. Their job is to refuel special operations helicopters like the HH-60W Jolly Green II and CV-22 Ospreys. This requires the massive transport plane to fly incredibly low and incredibly slow, matching the airspeed of a helicopter without stalling out. But for this specific mission in Iran, the refueling happened on the dirt. The MC-130J brought massive fuel bladders and specialized pumps. They also reportedly carried up to 4 MH-6 and AH-6 Little Bird helicopters disassembled in their cargo bays. Within minutes of landing, Night Stalker mechanics reassembled the Little Birds, fueled them directly from the MC-130J, and launched them into the mountains to find the downed weapons systems officer. And if you are wondering how the MC-130J had enough fuel to fly from their bases in Kuwait, penetrate 380 kilometers into Iran, and have enough gas left over to fuel helicopters, it's because the Commando II can receive fuel itself. Right on the top spine of the aircraft, just behind the cockpit, is the Universal Aerial Refueling Receptacle Slipway installation. This allows the MC-130J to link up with a KC-135 or KC-46 tanker and take on fuel mid-air. Even without aerial refueling, the Commando II boasts an unrefueled combat range of over 5,500 kilometers. That massive operational reach is exactly why Central Command chose this aircraft to penetrate the heart of Iran. So, we've established that the MC-130J is a technological marvel. It did its job perfectly. It navigated the mountains, evaded the air defenses, landed in the dark, and deployed the rescue force. So why did it all end in fire? According to official briefings and verified imagery, the problem was the Earth itself. The abandoned agricultural strip in Isfahan was a mix of loose sand and wet mud. While the runway was just barely sufficient for the landing, the sheer weight of the fully loaded MC-130J proved to be too much. As the aircraft taxied and sat on the ground, their wheels sank deep into the soft, unforgiving soil. When the time came to leave, the planes were immobilized. They could not generate the speed required to take off. Suddenly, the US military had a massive crisis on its hands. Elite American commandos were stranded. Central Command immediately called an audible. 3 replacement transport planes were dynamically retasked and flown straight into the hot zone. They successfully extracted every single American operator, the helicopter crews, and the wounded F-15E aviator. But they had no way to recover the 2 stuck MC-130J, or the Little Bird helicopter. The runway lacked the space and the heavy engineering equipment required to dig out multi-ton aircraft under enemy fire. If the US had abandoned those aircraft intact, it would have been an absolute intelligence goldmine for the Iranian military. Tehran and their allies in Moscow would have had unrestricted access to the US military's most heavily guarded secrets. They would have captured the exact algorithms of the terrain-following radar. They would have reverse-engineered the DIRCM laser countermeasures, figuring out exactly how to bypass them in the future. They would have seized the cryptographic communication keys, the friend or foe transponders, and the localized electronic warfare jammers. If Iran captured an intact MC-130J, the United States Special Operations Playbook wouldn't just be compromised, it would be completely blown wide open. So, standard military denial protocols were executed. The special operators rigged the avionics bays, the cockpits, and the classified sensor turrets of the MC-130J and the MH-6 Little Birds with thermite and high-explosive demolition charges. As the replacement aircraft lifted off the runway, they pressed the detonators. They deliberately destroyed $220 million worth of heavy transport planes and millions more in rotary wing assets, just to ensure that the enemy got nothing but melted aluminum and scorched earth. To a layman, seeing pictures of burned-out American C-130 in the Iranian desert in 2026 feels like history repeating itself in the worst possible way. But we have to look at this objectively. Eagle Claw was an operational failure that cost American lives. The 2026 rescue of Dude 44 was an operational triumph. Yes, the mission was incredibly messy. Yes, it was chaotic. The US lost an F-15E, an A-10 Warthog to anti-aircraft fire, and chose to self-destruct 2 MC-130J and multiple helicopters. The financial cost of this single rescue likely exceeds $300 million. But the primary objective of combat search and rescue is not to save money. It is to save the man. Special Operations Doctrine has a foundational pillar that never bends: leave no one behind. The United States military sent a massive strike package, penetrated hundreds of miles into a hostile, near-peer adversary's airspace, established a forward operating base, engaged in a heavy firefight, and pulled an American aviator off a mountain. And out of the hundreds of commandos, pilots, and intelligence officers involved in this incredibly dangerous mission, not a single American was killed. The loss of the MC-130J highlights the extreme, unpredictable vulnerabilities of operating heavy equipment in austere, unimproved environments. But it also highlights the breathtaking adaptability of the AFSOC crews and the overarching command structure. When the primary exfiltration plan literally sank into the mud, they didn't panic. They held the perimeter, called in reinforcements, sanitized the sensitive equipment, and flew home. In the high-stakes world of special operations, the tactical proficiency displayed on that muddy Iranian airstrip is absolutely commendable.